This is Casey Copeland, and this is the last of the Amazon presentation. So I'm going to start off with Heracles and Hippolyta's girdle. This was the ninth labor of Heracles. Eurystheus asked for the girdle of Hippolyta, the Amazon queen. Eurystheus wanted the girdle, the belt for his daughter. It was a leather belt that had been given to her by Ares, the war god, because she was the best warrior of all the Amazons. She wore this belt across her chest and used it to carry her sword and spear. Plus, the belt projected a magical aura of protection around her. The girdle was a belt that women wore above their hips. To loosen it was to offer oneself sexually. To take it forcefully was rape. So this was seen as a sexual deed. Heracles knew that he would not be able to fight the Amazons by himself, so he invited some companions along with him. The Amazons were an all-female tribe of warriors who hated and distrusted men, so of course the task was supposed to be impossible, like all the other labors. There was no way for Heracles and a small band of supporters to defeat a whole nation of dedicated fighters. Heracles knew he couldn't defeat the Amazons in battle, so he made friends with the queen, and she gave him the belt as a gift. Heracles charmed Hippolyta into gladly offering him the belt. Some versions of this tale state that Heracles impressed Hippolyta with a great feat of strength, but the feat is not expressly mentioned. One version states that Hippolyta was impressed by Heracles' lordly appearance. So this angered Hera, so she disguised herself as an Amazon and ran through the city proclaiming that Heracles had abducted Hippolyta. The Amazons attacked Heracles. Heracles thought that Hippolyta had been plotting to harm him the entire time, so he strangled Hippolyta, removed her girdle, and then sailed away after fighting through the Amazons to get back to the boat. And here is some artwork that portrays Heracles and the fight against the Amazons and Hippolyta. We see the fight in the upper right corner, and over on the left. Then we also see Heracles being portrayed as killing Hippolyta and then taking her girdle, and then also Hippolyta offering Heracles the belt. And after Amazons were mentioned in Greek mythology, several and lots of different ways and different myths and things like that. They continue to be seen in different cultures and societies, and I'm going to kind of talk about how they've been seen in the last millennium. Medieval Europe still saw the Amazons as a monstrous race. They were often grouped in with other weird races outside of the realms of Christendom, along with species of griffins, mouthless men, and giant-footed people. But as there was more discovery of different parts of the world, they were seeing more Amazons, and then they portrayed them differently. That did change, though, when female warriors like Joan of Arc entered the history books, and then the parallels between Amazons were pretty obvious. Both Joan and the Amazons wore full armor, but also had long flowing hair to emphasize their femininity. So we can see how that started to change in the 1400s, and the Amazons were being used in different ways. In the 1700s, Amazons were called upon for two symbolic reasons, both tied to early feminism, but one of them wasn't contemporary. With the rise of greater literacy across Europe and the printing press, women were making a big splash in the writing world, particularly when defending their own rights. And some people were not having it. In former times, the famous Dr. Samuel Johnson wrote, "A female writer, like a female warrior, was considered a kind of eccentric being, but the revolution of years has now produced a generation of Amazons of the pen, who with the spirit of their predecessors has set masculine tyranny at defiance, asserted their claim to the regions of science, and seem resolved to contest the usurpation of virility." It was not meant to be a praise, however, and through literary and proto-feminism of the time, from Mary Wollstonecraft to Emily de Chatelet probably would have taken it as such. The Amazons were being seen for another purpose too. Women were increasingly seeking out fashionable ensembles to ride horses, and Amazonian costumes were the label for the thing they wore. Weirdly enough, though, the Amazons were most famous for having reportedly invented trousers, so they didn't have to ride side saddle. But women didn't start wearing those for another few hundred years. They were again a hot topic in the feminist debate as the 16th century gave way to the 18th century, and they were used by both sides. The connection between Amazons and women's emancipation, writes Suzanne Zantop, was established in a series of comedies in the 19th century, in which the foolishness and ultimate futility of separate state, the Amazons were proven, and yet German feminists wrote about Amazons too, from chamber operas to plays and novels, stating an actual all-female society would be like, where they would give women more or less freedom. When it came to America, the notions of Amazons were brought to bear another fight about the rights of women, female warriors in the American Civil War. As it raged in the 1860s, stories of female heroism got lots of Amazons comparisons, particularly for women being on horseback, but there were also considerable Amazon-based sneering. Women dressed as men were seen as vaguely threatening. In a lot of cartoons of the period, Amazonians are seen as unnatural, rushing into war to do a man's job, even if in other places, like female spies dressed as men, being deemed an Amazon was a compliment. We also see how different societies were called Amazons because of their lethalness and being led by females, either being all females or being led by females. The Amazons of Dahomey, for instance, were the infamously lethal female warriors of what is now called Benin in Africa. They received their label in the 19th century from astonished French colonial occupiers, though the name referenced the fact that the women were brilliant warriors. Also referenced that the Amazons were considered exotic and other, so the name wasn't exactly a compliment. Into the 20th century, Amazon was no longer given to the name of horse riders or spies. It was more referred to women as circus performers, including they would be weightlifting or lifting several men in one go, and even some women were called one woman was called the Lady Hercules. And then, as the battle for female equality became more heated across the U.S. and Europe, Amazons became both symbolic and physical. The Amazonian women were actually seen as a kind of archetype for the ideal German female body in the Weimar Republic. And then we also have Amazons to thank for Katharine Hepburn. She became famous for bending gender norms throughout her time in Hollywood. Her first role of any kind was as an Amazon in The Warrior's Husband in 1933 on Broadway. In her grand entrancement, she had to jump down some stairs carrying a dead stag while wearing the glorious outfit seen here. However, beyond that brilliant image, the warrior-like appeal of the Amazons were being used by the newest fight for women's equality, the pursuit of suffrage. Suffragette Amazons, as one writer called them in 1912, was the more militant of the suffragette movement, willing to go to jail and create havoc for the sake of their beliefs, though again, the term wasn't always used as praise. Newspapers reported on the tendency of suffragettes to shriek and fight like Amazons. With horror in 1907, with the Great War in 1914, the idea took on a new and charming meaning. A rumor spread in 1915 that the British suffragettes were forming an Amazon battalion and going to France to help the Allies, which turned out to not be true. Today we associate Amazons with the Wonder Woman comics and films. The Wonder Woman comics were created in 1941 by American psychologist and writer William Moulton Marston and artist Harry G. Peter. It was featured then in DC Sensation Comics in 1942. And then according to the story from Marston, Wonder Woman began her life as Princess Diana on the fictional island of Themyscira, also called Paradise Island. Themyscira is inhabited by Amazons, an all-female warrior race. Diana's mother, Queen Hippolyta, sculpted the baby Diana from clay, and the Greek goddess Aphrodite gave her life. Later comics changed Diana's origin, making the Greek god Zeus her father, which made her part goddess. Diana entered man's world, the world outside of Themyscira, after United States intelligence officer Steve Trevor crashed his plane on the island. Diana then entered a contest with her fellow Amazons and won the right to return Trevor to man's world, where she became a crime fighter and ambassador for her people in America. In her ordinary work life as a U.S. Army nurse, intelligence officer, and other roles, she is known as Diana Prince. And then in 1974, the comic books were transposed onto TV. The TV film Wonder Woman came out in 1974, starring Kathy Lee Crosby, seen here. It resembled the comic book series that had come out in 1968 to 1973, meaning that the costumes and storyline were much different than what we now associate with Wonder Woman. It had been changed since the original was set in World War II, and the 1968 version was no longer in wartime. The film's ratings were respectable but not wondrous, but ABC didn't give up on the idea. In 1975, they developed another TV film, the new original Wonder Woman, and starring Linda Carter, and it most closely matched the original character by Marston. And the second film was much more successful, and it immediately led to the production of the series Wonder Woman. The TV series premiered in 1975. It stayed pretty close to the comic books, but did have some changes throughout. By the full third season, the rating had dropped enough that the series was pulled. In 2016, DC revived Wonder Woman in the film Batman vs. Superman: Dawn of Justice. In the final fight scene, with a creature made from Zod's body and Lex Luthor, Princess Diana pops in to help Superman and Batman. She could be seen throughout the whole film. Her godlike powers helped the trio defeat the creature. Her powers included super strength, super speed, and extreme durability. There's also some indication that she has some healing factors where she heals really quickly. And she also has the ability to release gigantic blasts of energy under extreme circumstances, which is powered from her gauntlets and her armor. And then in 2017, Wonder Woman had her own film. This film plot followed Marston's storyline pretty closely, except it's not set in World War II, it's set in World War I. The storyline is as follows. The daughter of Queen Hippolyta, Diana is raised in the hidden island of Themyscira. Hippolyta explains their history to Diana, including how Ares became jealous of humanity and orchestrated its destruction. When the other gods attempted to stop him, Ares killed all but Zeus, who used the last of his power to wound Ares and force his retreat. Before dying, Zeus left the Amazons a weapon, the God Killer, which is a sword, to prepare them for Ares' return. Okay. And then she is then trained. In 1918, Diana, now a young woman, rescues U.S. Captain Steve Trevor, who was a German spy before being outed. The German soldiers then follow Steve through the realm, through to man's world. Steve is interrogated with the lasso of Hestia, which is the lasso of truth, and reveals that there's a great war in the outside world, and that there's a German chemist trying to make a more deadlier form of mustard gas to end the war, and is under orders for General Erich Ludendorff. Believing Ares to be responsible for the war, Diana arms herself with a God Killer sword, the lasso, and armor before leaving Themyscira with Steve. They do, and Steve does come back with a notebook with all of Maru's ideas and gives it to the Supreme War Council in London, where Sir Patrick Morgan tries to negotiate a armistice with Germany, and finds that they're just going to release the gas on the Western Front. Morgan instead enlists Steve to fight the battle and try to stop them. And so he gives up a gang of men to try to stop them. And they go to the front lines where Diana is going through no man's land and is fighting her way through that. Once they won that battle, there is a gala, and Diana was going to kill Ludendorff, who she thought was Ares, but is not able to. They then go, Ludendorff then gets away. Diana pursues him. However, when she kills him with the God Killer, the war does not stop. Sir Patrick then appears and reveals himself to be Ares. He tells Diana that although he has steadily given human ideas inspiration, it is ultimately their decision to resort to violence, as they're inherently corrupt. When Diana attempts to kill Ares with the God-Killer sword, he destroys it, telling Diana that as the daughter of Zeus and Hippolyta, she herself is the God-Killer. He fails to persuade Diana to help him destroy mankind in order to restore paradise to Earth. And then Steve hijacks and pilots the bomber carrying the gases that from Maru's laboratory, goes to a safe altitude and detonates, killing himself. Ares attempts to direct Diana's raging grief at Steve's death by convincing her to kill Maru, but the memories of her experience with Steve cause her to realize that humans have good within them. She spares Maru and redirects Ares' lightning into him, killing him for good. The first film has much more mythological aspirations than the others. Justice League 2017, they're fighting an ancient evil called Steppenwolf, which is trying to bring back the Unity, which is more closely related to Norse mythology than Greek mythology, while Wonder Woman 1984 features an Aztec Dreamstone. It's more closely related to Aztec mythology.